Welcome to Race and Diplomacy. My name is Judd Devermont.
And I'm Travis Adkins. This video series is a series in which we discuss the moment of racial reckoning in the United States and across the world, and all of its implications for international affairs and foreign policy.
We're going to engage US, African, and global activists, journalists, educators, diplomats, and you. We want to change mindsets, processes, and practices, both at home and abroad.
In today's episode, we'd like to welcome Ryder, the CEO of Development Reimagined and a CSIS Senior Associate, Saron Tamerat, the co-manager of Black Livity China, and Guangzhi Huang, assistant professor at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. So listen, thank you guys so much for joining us. As an opening question, we hear so much about China as a place for investment and entrepreneurship for migrants from across the world. And what we're interested in figuring out first and foremost is what you all think it means to be African in China. Perceptions, misperceptions, challenges, opportunities, barriers to success for African migrants across China.
I just want to first start off by saying that we often refrain from using the word African migrant because it often tends to be very loaded, right? It doesn't paint a clear and nuanced image about who are these Africans that are going to China. So when you look at the African diaspora in China, there are diplomats, right? There are self-funded students. There are academics who go there to teach. There are expats. There are people who do short-term and long-term businesses. There are Africans that have settled roots in China and have formed union with Chinese people. So you have to consider the different experiences all these people are having. And oftentimes your experience is very much influenced by different factors, such as what city you're in. Your experience in a first-tier city is very different from your experience in a third-tier city. What is your role in society? What are you doing there? Are you there long-term versus short-term? Do you speak the languages? All of these often really influence your experience.
Thanks for that. Hannah, what would you say?
Well, I fully agree with Saron and what she said, that there is a very wide range of experiences. I first went to China as a diplomat working for the UN. And as an African diplomat, I got, a great deal of respect and, so much support. It was a really very interesting and great experience. Then I became a businesswoman. I opened a consultancy. Interestingly enough, as a business person, it wasn't so difficult to open a business. Actually, the challenges are more in terms of operations and working with others and bringing others on board. Africans are going to China for so many different reasons. Of course, you have the challenges in terms of visas, getting all of those, which you face in every single jurisdiction. Again, as an African traveling around the world, I've been to almost 50 countries, and a great number of them I've had to wait in visa centers for days and several days in order to get the visas. That's no different with China. It's not particularly more open or less open when it comes to those sorts of issues than many other parts of the world.
I think obviously Africans, based on my research as a scholar of the Chinese society, I think Africans face a lot of challenges in China, just like they would in many other countries. But I think most of the challenges stem from the fact that China is still a country that is developing in terms of its immigration regulations. China, for a long time, had been closed off to the outside world. So now they're opening up, but there are aspects of its legal, framework. Its immigration laws are a little bit slow to catch up. And the Chinese society itself too is grappling with the fact that their cities and their society is becoming more and more diverse, which is not something that they're used to. So obviously, this lack of knowledge and diversity and tolerance could create clashes between Chinese and Africans and the Chinese state and Africans as well. So I think as China becomes more and more globalized and its economy becomes more and more embedded in the global economy, the Chinese society and the Chinese state would eventually have to adapt to global norm that cities are and societies are more and more diverse.
I want to pick up on that point because here in America, what happened in Guangzhou, the violence against Africans has gotten a lot of attention, right? And we saw African ambassadors and foreign ministry officials raise this. But what happens in Guangzhou has a specific history, and that may not be unfolding elsewhere. And I learned this a lot from Hannah about understanding what's happening in different localities in those dynamics, those historical dynamics. And I was hoping, Guangzhi and Hannah, you could help explain why in some places those Chinese-African interactions are volatile and even violent, and in other places where that may not be the case.
First, we have to understand that the demographics of Guangzhou and say a small town like Yiwu are very, very different, right? Guangzhou is a top 5 city in China. It has more than probably 15 million people there, and it's historically been a large city with a strong local identity. And Yiwu has been developing very, very rapidly in recent years. So it's a town made up of immigrants and traders. From the perspective of urban politics, which is what I study. The land market in Yiwu is much less developed due to its lesser administrative and economic importance to China. In Guangzhou, if you look at where Africans concentrate, they are in these low-income communities that are centrally located, and they have really huge real estate potential. So since the late 1980s, many municipal governments, Guangzhou being no exception, depend really heavily on land sale. So I think whereas in smaller cities like Yiwu, the government may depend more on those shopping malls that cater specifically to the global trading community. In Guangzhou, the government has better use for those areas, so they could turn them into luxury gated communities or high-end commercial spaces. And that's why you see, the local government, the local law enforcement have been very, very tough on African communities, because ultimately it's about improving the image of the city, protecting, the real estate value of certain areas of the city. And actually, if you look at, how media portray Africans in Guangzhou, there is actually a honeymoon period in early 2000s when media reports would actually thank Africans for bringing businesses, bringing some sort of development to parts of the city, which had now become major African communities. But this honeymoon period passed in the late 2000s. So the volatility, at least based on my research, partly stems from the rapid evolution of the real estate industry in China in the past couple of decades, and the skyrocketing real estate prices. So that's why you see tougher law enforcement in Guangzhou, whereas in Yiwu, maybe that's why the government there is more welcoming toward Africans.
That's a lot to unpack. Hannah, do you agree, disagree, nuances to add?
Well, there's definitely major differences between how Africans have been able to chart a path, for themselves, especially in Yiwu and Guangzhou. And of course, there's also fairly large African communities, growing African communities in Beijing and Shanghai as well, and also in other cities, and especially as visa rules open up around students being able to stay in China to be able to work for Chinese companies or open up their own businesses. We're seeing more Africans in other parts of China as well. They've always been there, but now there's larger communities being larger communities growing. And absolutely, the difference between the way the municipalities have treated Africans in Guangzhou and Yiwu is very, very different. In Yiwu, you have, there's a specific section. They've been integrated with the African community. African leaders, business leaders have been invited to actually support each other. They're supported within the government to support the other Africans, make sure that they all work together. It's very, very different. And so my aspiration, my hope is that the kinds of actions that the municipality in Yiwu have taken can also be taken by others. But of course, as Guangzhi points out, there are going to be barriers to that, which are to do with internal factors, and Africans can't be in control of that. But we do need to be aware of those issues and try to deal with them ourselves.
I wanted to pick up on that point, Hannah, because Saron and yourself have kind of complicated the narrative for us in terms of the varying strata of African people in China, the different kinds of treatment that have happened, and some of the historical reasons why those are different. But I wanted to ask specifically about anti-Blackness in China and that experience, specifically as it relates to what we see in social media, the Black China hashtag, the propagation of some of these kinds of narratives across platforms, which would then lend themselves to comparisons to what is happening to Black people in America, what is happening across Africa within SARS or Zimbabwe Lives Matter, and kind of how you guys see that. Do you see those things as being overly simplified? Do you see those things as having some relevance? Talk to us.
I lived in Guangzhou for 5 years. I was there through the whole incident that transpired in April. I also went through that, and I just want to address the issues that social media raises, especially social media in terms of Douyin, what is popularly known as TikTok, Weibo. These social media platforms recently have especially become such an echo chamber that resonates anti-Blackness messages. And in Guangzhou, with the rise of African business traders, African students, expats, and all those people, there has been this rise of what is known as the Black invasion, fear that people of color are going to bring drugs, crime, and interracial marriage. And social media oftentimes really amplifies these feelings, and these feelings complicate the interaction between the African communities and the local communities on the ground. And you would think that because there are so many Africans, there are so many opportunities to interact with local communities, but that's not necessarily the case, because there's mistrust and there's this sense of fear from both sides. Africans are afraid of the prejudice that they face. And then, like I said, locals are afraid of what has now been termed as the Black invasion, right? So all of this really complicates this relationship that is going on. And the Africa-China relationship in Guangzhou is quite different from how it is in Yiwu. Yiwu also has a large African population, but their relationship is more smoother than that of the Guangzhou population.
Anna, did you want to speak to that?
Look, I think in every single society, and China is no exception, there is prejudice, there is racism. And as people interact, as Africans are able to get higher incomes and aspire to go to other countries, this is going to be something that they face, and we have to understand that whether we go to China, whether we go to the US, whether we go to the UK, we will be facing racism. This is the reality of the world that we live in. And of course, it will come in different forms. It will also manifest itself in different ways. In China, it's a very small African community when you think about the numbers that Saron just said, in comparison to many other countries. China does have a very small migrant community in general. And it's also mixed up with, and especially with COVID-19, there was a general anti-foreigner sentiment And so Africans obviously felt the brunt of that. But it will obviously take time, also take time for Africans to integrate more into society. As Guangzhi has mentioned, Africans have the largest African community has been in Guangzhou for a longer time than elsewhere. If municipalities are helpful, then there will be a way for Africans to integrate more. If visa rules open up, there will also be a way for Africans to integrate more and to be able to deal with the kinds of racist challenges and incidents that are faced. But it could take a while.
Hannah, you mentioned visa rules. I'd love to hear from all three of you, and we'll start with Guangxi on, what are the ways that we can address these problems? What are the ways that the Chinese government can, African governments, even the United States? I mean, and it's, you go wherever you need to go, whether it's around social media or it's around just sort of person-to-person relationships. How do we get to a better place, even understanding there's a huge diversity of experiences?
Guangzhou has a very strong local identity. The rhetorics that the locals use against Africans right now are very similar to the rhetorics that they use, against rural migrants in the early 1990s. So as I said, Guangzhou is still, the people there are still sort of trying to grapple with the fact that their city is becoming more and more diverse. So first, they had to deal with an influx of millions of migrants, rural migrants, and now you have more than 10,000 Africans, right? It's probably more shocking to them, right? So I think, as I'm not a public policy scholar, so I think from my perspective, what I hope to see is that the local government can create more spaces where Chinese and Africans can interact, and create dialogues. And right now, what we see predominantly is that dialogues tend to revolve around economic cooperation, but not in terms of cultural exchange, right? I think any economic partnership should be founded on a cultural foundation of mutual respect and diversity. So it really needs that basic understanding or consensus on mutual understanding and mutual respect and diversity, right? So I think the Chinese government needs to educate their people, do a better job in educating its people, its citizens, in terms of diversity. And if China wants to become a global leader, the Chinese, all the municipal governments will want to embrace diversity, right? So that's, I think, very, very important. If we're talking about a global community, say US or Europe, I think they also need to, take any opportunity, say the protest in Hong Kong as a learning moment, right? To teach maybe students in their country, Chinese students in their country, the idea of diversity. Overseas Chinese are agents of change in the Chinese society.
Yeah, let me build on that, because I think there's a real opportunity. We talk about leapfrogging. It would be great in some way for China to leapfrog some of the challenges that and help Africans leapfrog some of the challenges that they face in other places. I mean, just to take immigration policy as one example, even when with COVID-19, we saw the rules for Europeans going into China open up well before the rules opened up for Africans, and Africans are still also, we've just seen Nigeria and Ethiopia, for example, closed down. There's a real opportunity for China to look at. We've had this economic relationship. We've been in, Forum and China Africa Corporation has been in place for 20 years now. It's been increasing in terms of economic integration. It's helped push economic integration, increase trade, increase investment. There's obviously still a great deal more to do on that, But in terms of people-to-people flows, we've seen student numbers going up, so much so that now China is the largest. And pre-COVID-19 would definitely have been the largest cohort of African students around the world. Based on that, can there be much more focus on the people-to-people interactions, people bringing people, much stronger flows between China and African countries? How can that happen? There really needs to be a concerted effort from all sides.
I just want to add up a little bit on that, on what Hannah said. She raised such a wonderful point. There are such a large number of African students in China, and I think both China and Africa are aware that these African students are going to play a big role in bridging the gap between these two communities, because a lot of these African students, when you go and look at campuses, like big campuses like Tsinghua, Peking, and all these big schools have African student associations which organize cultural events, and they're showcasing what it means to be African through food, culture, dance, music, rising artists who have gained such a big agency on platforms like Douyin, like Sophie Green, are playing such big roles in bridging these gaps. So I think, yes, there are challenges, but like these young Africans are gonna bridge the gap. And also a lot of these Chinese students who are going into big schools to learn languages like Amharic, Yoruba, Swahili will also really play a big part in helping solve these miscommunication issues.
I think that's a wonderful note to end the episode on. I hope I can speak for Travis, but I've learned so much from the three of you, and really complicated the way I think about Africans in China, and some incredibly smart, both economic, people-to-people, academic recommendations for how to improve the relationship. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for joining across time zones and nations to make the second episode truly global.
Thank you.